The smell of grilled burgers and potato salad drifted across the manicured lawns of Willow Creek Estates that Sunday evening in March. But no amount of backyard bliss could hide the storm cloud hanging over every HOA gathering. At 29, I had learned to brace myself for these monthly community potlucks the way other people brace for root canals. Karen Whitaker, our beloved HOA president, always made sure the folding tables were arranged like a throne room, with her husband Jake and the rest of the board seated at the head like some suburban royalty. "Still hauling boxes down at that warehouse downtown, Sarah?" Jake asked, slicing into his burger with the precision of a man who loved the sound of his own voice. His tone dripped that special cocktail of pity and superiority he'd perfected since becoming vice president. I nodded, spearing a single potato. "Henderson Medical Supply." "Yes, medical supply," Karen repeated loudly enough for the entire cul-de-sac to hear, sharing a knowing glance with my parents, who just happened to be the treasurer and secretary of the board. "I suppose that's as close to real medicine as you'll ever get, right? Moving boxes around while the real professionals save lives." Dad chuckled, the sound low and dismissive. "Well, at least she's in the medical field somehow. Even if it's just loading trucks." The familiar knot tightened in my stomach, but I kept my face neutral. These potlucks had followed the exact same script for 5 years, ever since I'd quietly stepped away from what everyone assumed was my failed pre-med track at State. They had their version locked and loaded. I couldn't handle the coursework, bombed organic chemistry, finally accepted my limitations, and found something more appropriate. They had no clue about the full scholarship to Johns Hopkins that arrived 2 weeks after I supposedly dropped out. No clue about the accelerated MD program I finished in 3 years, the cardiothoracic surgery residency that nearly broke me, or the interventional cardiology fellowship that landed me as chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Metropolitan Hospital. And they definitely had no clue that Henderson Medical Supply, the warehouse I supposedly worked at, was actually the largest medical device distributor on the East Coast, the very company that supplied every scalpel, stent, and heart-lung machine in the tri-state area, including the hospital where I operated. "You know what I think?" Jake continued, warming to his favorite sermon. "Sarah finally realized medicine requires actual intelligence. Not everyone can handle the pressure of being responsible for people's lives." Karen reached over and patted my hand in what she clearly believed was maternal wisdom. "There's no shame in finding work that suits your abilities, honey. The warehouse job seems steady, and that's what matters." Jake grinned wider. "Failed pre-meds make great supply clerks. At least you understand some of the terminology, right? Even if you couldn't actually cut it in med school." I set down my fork and looked him dead in the eye. "You're right. I do understand the terminology. See? That's the positive attitude we like." Dad raised his plastic cup in a mock toast. "Accepting reality and making the best of it. That's maturity." Karen leaned back, clearly enjoying the show. "Remember when you used to talk about becoming a surgeon? God, that was adorable. You probably would have fainted at the first sight of blood." She laughed that high, fake HOA president laugh that always made the neighbors pretend to check their phones. "Jake, don't tease your sister too much. She's found her place." "I'm not teasing," Jake protested with mock sincerity. "I'm proud of her for finally being realistic about her limitations. Not everyone can handle real medicine. Surgery, especially, that takes nerves of steel and lightning-fast decisions. Some people just aren't built for that kind of pressure." I nodded slowly, cutting another piece of burger. "You're absolutely right about the pressure." "Exactly." Jake's eyes lit up like he'd just won the neighborhood debate of the year. "And the hours surgeons work, crazy schedules, emergency calls at all hours, life and death decisions every single day. It's not for everyone. The hours can be challenging," I agreed calmly. Dad leaned in, not wanting to be left out. "And the education requirements are insane. 8 years minimum, then residency, fellowships. The smartest people I know struggled with that workload. No shame in admitting when something's beyond your capabilities." Karen jumped back in. "Plus the malpractice insurance alone. Do you know how much cardiac surgeons pay? Hundreds of thousands a year. The liability when you're literally holding someone's heart in your hands. Enormous. I took a sip of lemonade, watching Karen's voice take on that lecturing tone she usually reserved for finding residents over lawn height. Her HOA presidency had given her just enough power to fuel the same superiority complex Jake had from his bank job. And the training, Mom added, not wanting to miss her cue. Medical residency is like boot camp, 36-hour shifts, being screamed at by attending physicians. You're always so sensitive, Sarah. That kind of environment would have eaten you alive. Probably for the best that you figured it out before you got in too deep. Jake nodded sagely. Better to quit early than fail out spectacularly later. I finished the last bite and set my plate down. You're all very thoughtful to be so concerned about the challenges of medical training. We just want you to be happy, Dad said with that fake warmth beneath the condescension. Sometimes the best thing we can do for the people we love is help them see reality clearly. Jake raised his cup. To Sarah for finally finding work that suits her abilities. No more pretending to be something she's not. Karen, Mom, and Dad clinked their cups, beaming with the smug satisfaction of people who had successfully managed their difficult daughter's expectations. I raised my lemonade and smiled back. To finding where you belong. After the potluck, while neighbors drifted home, Jake helped me carry leftovers to the car while Karen supervised the cleanup like a dictator inspecting troops. You know, Sarah, he said, tone shifting to big brother concern, you're 29 now, and you finally seem to have your head on straight about this career thing. Maybe it's time to start thinking about other goals like dating, marriage, kids, normal life stuff. I handed him the last container. You think I should focus on finding a husband? I think you should focus on building a realistic life, he said, warming up. Find a nice guy who works with his hands. Maybe someone who won't make you feel bad about the warehouse job. Start a family. Give Mom and Dad some grandkids. That's very traditional of you. Traditional works, Jake insisted. Look at me and Karen. Nice house in Willow Creek, talking about kids next year. Steady, predictable, happy. I nodded thoughtfully. And you think that kind of stability would be good for me? Perfect for you. No more stress about careers you can't handle. Just simple living with someone who accepts you as you are. He clapped me on the shoulder. Actually, I know a guy. Mike Thompson, works construction. Nice guy. Steady work. Doesn't have unrealistic expectations. Unrealistic expectations, I repeated. He wouldn't expect you to be some high-powered career woman or anything. He'd appreciate a wife who understands honest work. I smiled at my brother, the man who thought he understood my entire life. I'll think about it. Good. He looked thrilled, like he'd just solved world hunger. I'll talk to Karen about setting something up. Casual dinner next weekend. We rejoined the board in the clubhouse, where Karen was already lecturing two neighbors about their trash can placement. I settled into a corner chair and half listened while Jake announced to everyone, Sarah's finally ready to start thinking about settling down. I'm introducing her to Mike Thompson. Karen clasped her hands. Oh, that's wonderful. I was starting to worry you'd never get interested in dating. You always seemed so focused on those impossible career goals. Dad nodded. Thompson's a good name. Solid. Construction work is honest work. Plus, Mike won't have any unrealistic expectations about what kind of wife he's getting. I listened to my own family plan my future with a man I'd never met. The singular virtue being that he wouldn't expect too much from the warehouse girl. They spoke with the confident authority of people who had finally sorted out their problematic daughter's life, and I felt almost fond of their certainty. The evening wound down with more discussion of Mike's virtues and Karen's generous offer to host the first meeting. I hugged everyone goodbye and promised to give it serious thought. Jake walked me to my car, still dispensing advice. The thing is, you spent so many years trying to be something you're not that you forgot how to just be yourself. Mike will help you remember there's nothing wrong with being ordinary. I thanked him and drove home to my quiet apartment across town, where a stack of the latest Cartotherapeutic journals waited on my coffee table and a presentation for Monday's department meeting still needed finishing. 3 months seemed like a reasonable amount of time for my family to fully settle into their comfortable assumptions about my life, my future with Mike Thompson, and the HOA fines they kept cheerfully adding to my account for my own good. 3 months and 2 days later, I was reviewing patient charts in my office at Metropolitan Hospital when my pager screamed with a code that sent ice through my veins. Emergency cardiac event, incoming ambulance. Patient identification, Jacob Whitaker, age 31. Jake Whitaker, my brother Jake. I was already moving toward the elevator when my phone rang. Karen's voice came through high and panicked, barely coherent through sobs. Sarah. Oh God, Sarah. Something's wrong with Jake. He just collapsed at the HOA board meeting. They said his heart. They're taking him to Metropolitan. Can you meet us there? I don't know what to do. Karen, I said calmly, stepping into the elevator and hitting the button for the ER. I'm already here. What exactly did the paramedics tell you? They said it might be a heart attack, but he's only 31. Sarah, how can he be having a heart attack? They're doing CPR in the ambulance. The elevator doors opened onto controlled chaos. I could see the ambulance bay doors sliding open, the EMT team wheeling in a gurney with a familiar form lying motionless under a white sheet, monitors beeping wildly, bags swinging. Karen was running alongside, crying and firing questions no one had time to answer. Ma'am, you can't go back there, a nurse said gently, catching Karen's arm as the trauma team took over. But Karen's eyes found me, recognition dawning. Dr. Morrison, are you Wait, Sarah? The trauma bay erupted into the controlled ballet of emergency medicine. Voices called out numbers and medication orders, while Jake's body disappeared behind a curtain of scrubs and equipment. I stood at the edge, watching the monitors, automatically translating the medical shorthand. Massive anterior wall myocardial infarction, complete LAD occlusion, cardiogenic shock, V-fib arrest. In layman's terms, a major heart attack caused by a completely blocked artery. His heart unable to pump, rhythm gone chaotic and deadly. Dr. Morrison. Dr. Patricia Chin, the ER attending, appeared at my elbow. I'm so sorry about your brother. We've got him stabilized for now, but he's going to need immediate cardiac catheterization and probably emergency bypass. This is a big one. I nodded, eyes still on the monitors. Cath lab, available? Dr. Rodriguez is scrubbing in, but honestly, this is beyond interventional. He's going to need open heart surgery, and he needs it fast. Ejection fraction down to 15%. Karen grabbed my arm, nails digging in. Sarah, what are they saying? Is he going to be okay? Why won't anyone tell me what's happening? I looked down at my sister-in-law, this woman who had spent the last 5 years helping my family fix my disappointing life, and felt the familiar calm that always settled over me in these moments. Someone had to be strong. Someone had to make the decisions that would decide whether Jake lived or died. Karen, I said gently, Jake has had a serious heart attack. They're going to do everything they can, but he needs surgery. Surgery. Her voice cracked. What kind of surgery? Dr. Chin glanced between us, uncertain how much detail to share. We're looking at emergency cardiac bypass, but I have to be honest. Cases like this, timing is everything. Every minute counts. Where's the cardiac surgeon? Karen demanded, panic sharpening into focus. Why isn't he here yet? Dr. Chin looked at me again. Dr. Morrison, given the circumstances, would you like to be involved in the treatment decisions? Dr. Morrison. Karen's voice shot up an octave. Sarah, why is she calling you Dr. Morrison? The trauma bay had gone quieter around us. The initial crisis was stable enough for the next few minutes, but Jake's condition remained critical. I could hear my parents' voices echoing down the hallway, demanding to see their son, demanding answers from nurses who were calmly explaining hospital protocols. Karen, I said, taking her hands, I need you to listen very carefully. Jake is going to need emergency heart surgery, and he's going to need it performed by the most experienced cardiac surgeon available. Do you understand? She nodded frantically. Yes, get the best surgeon. Money doesn't matter. Insurance will cover it. Just save him. The thing is, I continued, voice steady, the most experienced cardiac surgeon available right now is me. Karen stared at me blankly, her brain visibly short-circuiting. I don't understand. I'm Dr. Sarah Morrison, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery here at Metropolitan Hospital. I've been Jake's sister and a cardiac surgeon for the past 5 years. And right now, I'm the person most qualified to save his life. The color drained from Karen's face. Behind us, my parents were still arguing with security, their voices carrying that entitled tone that expected emotional distress to override every rule, including the ones they enforced on everyone else in Willow Creek. But you work at the warehouse, Karen whispered. I own Henderson Medical Supply, I said gently. It's one of the largest medical device distributors on the East Coast. We supply equipment to every hospital in the tri-state area, including this one. Dr. Chin cleared her throat. Dr. Morrison, your brother's condition is deteriorating. If we're going to attempt surgical intervention, we need to move now. I squeezed Karen's hands once more and released them. I need to scrub in. The surgery will take approximately 4 to 6 hours, depending on what we find. Dr. Chin will keep you updated. Wait, Karen grabbed my arm as I turned. Sarah, are you really? I mean, are you actually going to operate on Jake? I paused, looking back. Karen, I performed over 800 cardiac procedures in the past 5 years. Jake is going to receive the same level of care I would give any patient, which is the highest level available anywhere in this region. But he said Jake always said you were. I know what Jake said. My voice stayed gentle. Right now what Jake said doesn't matter. What matters is that his left anterior descending artery is completely occluded. His heart muscle is dying, and I have about 20 minutes to get him into an operating room before the damage becomes irreversible. Karen nodded numbly. I left her standing there while I headed toward the surgical suites where my team was already preparing. As I walked the hallway, I could hear my parents' voices growing louder, still demanding answers. I stopped at the nurse's station and picked up the phone. This is Dr. Morrison. Please escort the Whitaker family to the cardiac surgery waiting area and explain that the patient is being prepared for emergency bypass. The surgeon will speak with them after the procedure. Yes, Dr. Morrison. Should we mention that you're the... Just tell them the chief of cardiothoracic surgery is handling the case personally. I hung up and continued to the surgical suite where my team waited. Dr. Sarah Kim, my lead nurse, appeared at my shoulder. I heard it's your brother on the table today. You sure you want this case? Dr. Patterson is available if you'd rather step back. Thanks, Sarah, but no. This is exactly where I need to be. She nodded. Then let's save your brother's life. I finished my scrub and stepped into the OR, where Jake lay unconscious, chest prepped and draped, his life now depending entirely on the skills my family had spent 5 years insisting I didn't possess. The anesthesiologist confirmed stability. The perfusionist verified the heart-lung machine. My team took their positions. Scalpel, I said, and began the procedure that would either save Jake's life or prove every mocking word they'd ever said about me tragically wrong. 4.5 hours later, I emerged from the operating room, surgical cap in hand, to find my family clustered in the cardiac surgery waiting area. Their faces carried the particular exhausted terror that comes from hours of helpless waiting. Karen looked up first. Someone had clearly explained to her exactly who I was and what I had been doing while she thought I was stacking boxes. Sarah, Mom stood slowly, voice uncertain. They said the nurse said you were. Jake came through the surgery beautifully. I told them, pulling off my cap so they could see my face clearly. We performed a triple bypass, restoring blood flow to all the affected areas. He's stable, and his prognosis is excellent. Dad stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between wonder and dawning horror, as if he were seeing me for the first time in years. You operated on Jake. I did. You're really a doctor. I'm really a doctor. Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, actually, have been for the past 3 years. Karen started crying again, but these tears were different. Relief mixed with something that looked a lot like shame. Sarah, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. Jake never said we thought you were. You thought I was exactly what I let you think I was. Mom reached out tentatively, as if afraid she no longer had permission to touch me. "Honey, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us believe?" I looked at my family, the same people who had spent 5 years explaining my limitations to me, while using their HOA power to fine me for every tiny violation in Willow Creek, and felt the same calm I'd carried through the entire operation. Because it didn't matter what you believed about my life. It only mattered what was true. "But we said such awful things," Dad said, voice rough. "We treated you like. You treated me like someone you cared about, but didn't understand," I answered gently. "That's not the worst thing a family can do." Over the next 2 hours, as Jake slowly woke up in the cardiac ICU, the full scope of the misunderstanding unfolded. I answered every question about medical school, residency, how I had completed my training while they thought I was dropping out. I explained Henderson Medical Supply, my position at the hospital, the life I had built while they assumed I was learning to accept my limitations. Jake's first words when he regained consciousness were slurred but unmistakable. "Did they get the best surgeon?" Karen took his hand and looked at me before answering. "They got the chief of cardiothoracic surgery." Jake's eyes found mine across the ICU bed. Through the post-surgical haze of medication and confusion, I watched him try to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the woman who had just held his heart in her hands. "Sarah." "Hi, Jake. Welcome back. You're going to be fine, but you'll need some lifestyle changes. We'll talk about that when you're stronger." He closed his eyes, struggling with concepts that no longer fit his worldview. When he opened them again, his expression had shifted into something I had never seen from him before. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You don't need to apologize for having a heart attack. No, I mean, I'm sorry for what I said. About you not being smart enough. About medicine being too hard. About you being a failure." I squeezed his hand. "Jake, you said what you believed to be true based on the information you had. That's not something you need to apologize for. But I was wrong about everything." I looked at my brother, the man who had built his entire identity around being the successful one on the HOA board, now learning that his biggest failure had been assuming he understood what success looked like. "You weren't wrong about everything. You were right about the pressure, the long hours, the difficulty of life and death decisions. You were right that it's not for everyone." He managed a weak smile. "But it was for you. It was for me." In the days that followed, as Jake recovered and my family gradually adjusted to the new reality of who I actually was, the HOA board meetings took on a very different tone. Karen, who had once delighted in citing me for violations. Mailbox 1 inch too far left, grass 0.2 inches too long, holiday flag displayed 1 day early, now found herself strangely quiet when the subject of community standards came up. The neighbors started noticing too. Whispers spread through Willow Creek that the president's own daughter had been the one quietly saving lives while the board spent their time measuring lawn heights. The petty fines that had once rained down on my driveway mysteriously stopped appearing in my mailbox. Karen tried, in her awkward way, to make amends. She showed up at my door one evening with a basket of apology muffins and a carefully rehearsed speech about reflecting on our family dynamics for the good of the community. I accepted the muffins, thanked her politely, and watched her squirm when I casually mentioned that my firm now supplied the very defibrillators used in the neighborhood emergency response kits she had insisted on purchasing last year, at triple the price, of course. Jake, still pale, but improving, started asking real questions about my actual life instead of making assumptions. Mom began introducing me at board meetings as our daughter, Dar, Sarah Morrison, instead of the one who works at the warehouse. Dad stopped chuckling dismissively and started listening when I spoke. But the sweetest moment came 3 weeks later at the next potluck. Karen stood at the head table, trying to rally support for yet another ridiculous rule, this time banning solar panels because they ruined the aesthetic. Halfway through her speech, an older neighbor raised his hand. "Before we vote, Mrs. President, maybe we should ask Dr. Morrison what she thinks. She seems to know a thing or two about saving things that other people thought were beyond repair." The entire cul-de-sac went silent. Karen's face turned the exact shade of the approved paint color 47 she had forced everyone to use. For the first time in years, the HOA president had nothing to say. I simply smiled and took another bite of potato salad. The dark humor of it all hit me hardest during Jake's follow-up appointment 2 months later. He sat on the exam table in my office, still wearing the same superior smirk he'd used for years. Only now it was directed at himself. "So let me get this straight," he said, gesturing at the diplomas on my wall. "While Karen was fining you $250 for having your trash can visible for 12 minutes on pickup day, you were literally in the or replacing heart valves? Triple bypasses, mostly," I answered, checking his incision. "But yes." He rubbed his chest, still tender. "I spent 5 years telling everyone my little sister couldn't handle pressure. Meanwhile, you were the one keeping the entire hospital supply chain running and operating on people whose hearts were literally stopping." I shrugged. "You were very convincing." Karen, sitting in the corner pretending to read a magazine, finally spoke. "Sarah, I owe you more than an apology. I used my position to make your life harder because I genuinely believed you needed the tough love. Every fine, every citation, I told myself it was for your own good." I turned to her. "Karen, you fined me for a mailbox that was 1 inch out of alignment the same week I performed an emergency transplant on a 17-year-old. You cited my lawn the day after I worked a 36-hour shift. You lectured me about realistic expectations while I was presenting research at national conferences. So yes, you owe me more than an apology. But I don't need one." She blinked. "You don't?" "No. Because the moment I stopped needing your approval was the moment I became free. You can keep your rules, your fines, your little throne at the head of the potluck table. I never needed any of it." Jake laughed, a real laugh this time, not the mocking one. "She's got you there, Karen. The woman who saved my life just told the HOA president she doesn't need her approval. That's going in the neighborhood newsletter." Karen's face did something complicated, half shame, half reluctant respect. "The board is voting next month on whether to relax some of the more stringent guidelines. I may have mentioned your name as a consultant." I raised an eyebrow. "A consultant?" The warehouse girl. She actually blushed. "The chief of cardiothoracic surgery, who also happens to own the company that supplies our local ambulance fleet." Yes, the satisfaction that washed over me wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, deep, and delicious, like the first perfect breath after a 5-year chokehold. I had let them build their entire narrative around my supposed failure, had watched them use HOA power to punish me for it, and in the end their entire worldview had collapsed the moment they needed the very skills they had mocked. That night, I sat on my perfectly acceptable, but still slightly unapproved, porch, watching the sun set over Willow Creek. Across the street, Karen was measuring her own lawn with a ruler, something she had never done before. Jake waved from their driveway, still moving slowly, but smiling like a man who had been given a second chance at more than just his heartbeat. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike Thompson, the suitable guy Jake had tried to set me up with. I had finally met him for coffee last week. Nice guy. Steady. Zero expectations. I deleted the message without replying. Some expectations, it turned out, were worth exceeding after all. The final delicious twist came at the annual Willow Creek HOA meeting 3 months after Jake's surgery. Karen stood at the podium in her usual power blazer, but the confidence was gone. The neighbors had heard the story, how the quiet warehouse resident they had pitted for years was actually the surgeon who had saved the vice president's life while the board was busy debating flagpole height regulations. Karen cleared her throat. "Before we begin the usual business, I'd like to recognize someone who has contributed more to this community than most of us realized." She gestured toward me in the back row. Dr. Sarah Morrison, our own chief of cardiothoracic surgery and owner of Henderson Medical Supply. Without her, my husband wouldn't be here today. A round of applause rippled through the room. Genuine this time, not the polite HOA clapping I was used to. Several residents who had been fined into oblivion over the years shot Karen pointed looks that said everything words couldn't. I stood up slowly. Thank you, Karen. But I'd like to make one small suggestion for the good of the community. I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for her to start sweating. Perhaps we could reconsider some of the more creative interpretations of the bylaws. The ones that fine residents for things like mailbox alignment or grass length measured to the millimeter. After all, if we can survive a real medical emergency, maybe we can survive a slightly imperfect lawn. The room erupted in laughter, the kind of laughter that comes when years of pin-up frustration finally find an outlet. Karen's face cycled through 3 shades of red before she forced a smile. Point taken, Dr. Morrison. The board will be reviewing the enforcement guidelines immediately. Later, as people filed out, several neighbors stopped to thank me. Not for the surgery, but for finally saying what they had all been thinking. One older woman, who had been cited 12 times in the last year for excessive holiday decorations, actually hugged me. You just saved more than your brother's life today, she whispered. Jay caught me at the door. You know, I spent years telling everyone you weren't built for pressure. Turns out the only thing that couldn't handle the pressure was my own ego. He grinned. Karen's already talking about resigning as president, so she needs to focus on family. Translation: she's terrified you'll show up to the next meeting with actual data on how ridiculous our rules are. I shrugged. Tell her she can keep the title. I never wanted it. He studied me for a long moment. You really don't need any of us to believe in you, do you? Never did. As I walked back to my house, the one with the mailbox still 1 inch out of alignment on purpose now, I felt the last of the old weight lift. For 5 years, I had carried their assumptions like armor. I had let them mock, fine, and pity me while I quietly saved lives and built something real. And in the end, the only person who had ever needed to believe in me was the one who had been doing the work all along. Behind me, Karen stood on her perfectly compliant porch, watching me go. For the first time since she had taken the gavel, the HOA president looked ordinary. And that, more than any surgery or any apology, was the sweetest revenge of all. Because the thing about being underestimated is that it only matters if you need other people's estimation to know your own worth. And after 5 years of letting my family, and their entire ridiculous HOA empire, believe I was less than I was, I had learned the only validation that ever mattered was the one I gave myself every single time I stepped into an operating room. The neighborhood was still standing. The rules were still there. But the power had shifted quietly, permanently, and deliciously. And somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower started up, cutting the grass to exactly 2.1 inches instead of the required 2.0. No fine was issued. For once, the HOA stayed silent.